Welcome, my friends, to the Hebraic Living Walking with Messiah broadcast. We're excited to have you here with us as we explore the rich traditions and teachings of Hebraic living, guiding you on a journey to walk in alignment with your Messiah. Whether you're seeking spiritual growth, practical insights, or a deeper connection with your faith, this show is here to inspire and uplift you. In last week's episode, we began our multi-part series, Biblical versus Secular Marriage, and discussed current marriage and divorce rates, and then we reviewed the biblical views on marriage. If you haven't seen that episode, please take some time to go and watch that at your leisure. In today's episode, we will continue our series reviewing secular views on marriage and what the scriptures have to say about divorce. Remember to plug in every Tuesday at the same time to see the show live, and you can also view it on demand on the lambnetwork.tv website. Also, each show is recorded on our Daily Torah YouTube channel. Welcome to all our new listeners, and if you're not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button so you never miss a single episode. If you have your Bible or notepads handy, get them ready, and let's begin. We have a lot to discuss today. So let's load up the program and let's get started. So last week we discussed biblical marriage, and so this week we are going to take a look at secular marriage. So what is the difference between biblical and secular marriage? Well, the modern views on marriage are that secular marriage has evolved significantly over time, influenced by cultural, legal, and social factors. Today, marriage in many secular societies is seen primarily as a legal contract between two individuals, with the state, the government, playing a central role in its regulation and recognition. Now let's look at some of the legal aspects of a secular marriage. One, it's viewed as a contract, and it's considered a binding legal contract between two individuals. This contract grants certain rights and responsibilities to both parties, such as property rights, inheritance rights, and obligations of support. The legal benefits are that married couples often enjoy various legal benefits such as tax advantages, spousal support, and shared health insurance. These benefits are designed to provide economic stability and support to the married couple. What about equality? Well, modern secular societies have increasingly recognized marriage equality, allowing same-sex couples to marry and enjoy the same legal rights as heterosexual couples. This reflects a broader commitment to equality and non-discrimination from a worldly view, right? From a secular view. Now, what about the social and psychological perspectives? Well, we have personal fulfillment, right? Secular views on marriage emphasize personal fulfillment and emotional satisfaction. Marriage is seen as a partnership that should enhance the well-being and happiness of both individuals. And then we have the mutual consent. The importance of mutual consent and equality in the relationship is a key aspect of secular marriage. Both partners are seen as equals with shared responsibilities and decision-making power, right? It all sounds great so far, doesn't it, my friends? So then we have we have the changing gender roles, right? We have the transgenders. Now we have the secular view on marriage has evolved to reflect changing gender roles and expectations. Traditional gender roles are less rigid, and there is a greater acceptance of diverse family structures and arrangements. Whatever's right in your own eyes, secular marriage can fall under, right? And it's perverted in a way based exactly on the opposite of what God's design for marriage was originated as. And if we look at this comparison, while there are significant differences between secular and biblical views on marriage, there are some areas of overlap. Now, understanding these similarities and differences helps to illuminate the broader societal and cultural context in which marriage is practiced, right? We need to understand how the world works around us. We don't want to be part of the world, but we need to understand how it works, right? We want to be wise as serpents, but we don't want to follow in the way of the serpent. So the similarities, commitment. Both secular and biblical views emphasize the importance of commitment and fidelity in marriage. Faithfulness to one's partner is a cornerstone in both perspectives. And then partnership. Both views recognize marriage as a partnership that involves mutual support, cooperation, and shared goals, right? It all sounds so good so far, right? But then there are the differences. And this is the crux of the issue. The differences are the foundation and purpose. Biblical marriage is seen as a divine covenant with spiritual significance, whereas secular marriage is primarily a legal and social contract. And then we have the roles and responsibilities, right? Biblical views often prescribe specific roles for husbands and wives rooted in religious teachings. Secular views, however, emphasize equality and flexibility in roles and responsibilities. And then there's the equality aspect, right? Secular societies increasingly recognize marriage equality in the rights of same-sex couples, reflecting broader commitments to equality and human rights. Biblical views on marriage may vary significantly depending on religious interpretation and denomination, but for the most part, they are grounded in the Bible and in God's way of living. So that is the big differences of a secular and biblical marriage. Now, let's discuss a little bit how secular views shape contemporary marriage practices. Well, one point is the legal recognition and rights. The legal recognition of marriage in secular society grants couples a wide range of rights and protections. These include property rights, inheritance rights, and social security benefits. The legal framework aims to provide stability and security to married couples. And then we have diverse family structures. Secular views on marriage have contributed to the acceptance of diverse family structures. Remember, they fought in the U.S. Congress and Senate to pass these same-sex laws so that, homosexuals could marry and have same-sex marriages, right? And this includes single-parent families, blended families, and same-sex marriages. The emphasis on equality and non-discrimination has expanded the definition of family, right? Even though it has expanded the definition of a family, in God's eyes, it's truly not the family that he designed it to be. Let's be honest with each other. A marriage is between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, for the sole purpose of procreation and to be able to expand the God family. Remember, we are created in God's image, and he has ordained and instituted marriage, not only from a physical aspect, but it's a spiritual covenant between a husband and a wife, just like it's a spiritual covenant between Messiah and the congregation of believers, right? He's coming as the bridegroom, and we as the congregation of believers are the bride. He's not coming to marry multiple brides. He's not going to have multiple wives. He's not going to be in a polygamous relationship with multiple churches or congregations. He's coming for one congregation, the congregation of believers under him, who keep his commands, who keep his Shabbats, his holy days, who follow and walk the way that he walked, and are in agreement with him in every aspect of living. And he's coming to claim that bride without spot or blemish. Now remember, and we're going to get into this in our coming episodes, Israel was the first bride, right? They came out of Egypt. God married them at Mount Sinai on the day of Shavuot, but they broke that covenant, and God had every right to divorce that wife, and he did. And this is one reason why Yeshua had to come, and also part of why he had to die and sacrifice himself to break that covenant, that old covenantal marriage, so that he could have the new covenant based on him and his shed blood, in a renewed covenant that he could but bring about his bride and marry his new bride. So we are all part of the commonwealth of Israel, but God in the old days, and we're going to get into this in some of our further teachings ahead, and we're going to try to understand, Yeshua's sacrifice was much, much more than just the redemption of sins. There was also a legal covenantal covering, a covenant that had to be dissolved for him to marry the soon coming bride of Messiah. And I know that's hard to understand, and it can be a little troublesome for some, but we're going to do a deep dive into that in upcoming episodes. Now, another aspect is personal and emotional fulfillment. Secular views place a strong emphasis on personal and emotional fulfillment in marriage. The idea that marriage should enhance the well-being and happiness of both partners has led to a focus on relationship quality, communication, and mutual support. And then we have a fourth aspect: changing social norms. The evolution of gender roles and expectations has influenced contemporary marriage practices. There is a greater acceptance of non-traditional roles and arrangements, reflecting broader societal changes and the move towards gender equality. Now, the conclusion of the matter of secular marriage in this aspect, this part 3, is secular views on marriage highlight the importance of legal recognition, personal fulfillment, and equality. While there are key differences from biblical perspectives, both views recognize the significance of commitment and partnership in marriage. The understanding sets the stage for exploring how divorce is viewed in both contexts, which we will discuss in our next section. Now, before we get into that section, I do want to remind you from last week that we have this conference coming up, and it's in any city that you are in the country, but specifically here in Dallas, it's coming up in November, but it's called the Weekend to Remember, And it's put on by an affiliate, associate congregation of ours, Campus Crusade for Christ, by Family Life. It's part of their outreach. And it says here, great marriages don't just happen. And I want to encourage, if you're young, old, no matter what part of the marriage that you are in, that you take a weekend to remember and learn and grow, so that when you get down the road, you do not become estranged from your spouse and issues start rising up. That if everyone will go through this program and invest in their marriage, they will find that down the road, they will have some of the most long-lasting, successful marriages on earth. Now, I want to let you know that you can go to weekendtoremember.com or call the number on your screen, but use our group code AMJCC, and you will save over $100 per couple. And also, if you go to the website, you'll see all the list of cities around the U.S. And if you see the early bird special, you'll save additional, I think it's $50 off of the cost. So basically, you're almost getting into the conference for free at a small cost, and you just have to pay for your hotel. And if it's local, if it's not local, then also any travel expenses. So you can go anywhere in the country. You don't have to go in your local area. You can make a vacation out of it and go to the Weekend to Remember at a place that interests you. But I really recommend that you do it. You'll really learn a lot, and you'll get a lot out of it. In addition to that, part of what we're going to start here that came from the Weekend to Remember is the Art of Marriage small group study. I want to encourage anyone who's interested, and if you have the time, it's going to be a live sessions. So it's going to be on Wednesday nights, beginning July 9th at 7 p.m. Central Time in the U.S., out of Dallas, Texas. We'll do a live. I don't know if I'm going to do Zoom or Teams. I'm going to do one of those to be able to plug everybody in. But you have to sign up first. And the way that you sign up is you email me at info@mymdi.org and just put in the subject line, Art of Marriage, and then tell me your name and your spouse's name and where you're from, and I will send you the information to be able to do that. There are 2 little workbooks that you'll have to purchase. I think they're like the 2 of them together is like $29 or something like that. I'll send you the link to where to buy them. We don't make any money off this. It's all free for us. There's no registration fees. We're doing it out of our ministry to be able to help and serve married couples. There'll be 6 main sessions that'll deal with biblically based words that love, like hesed and bachak or dakbak, and and yada, and then some Greek words. And we'll have workbooks and lessons to do. There's also an optional drawn together devotional that includes 52 devotionals, 1 per week. And you do that with your spouse, and that'll deepen your connection with one another. So none of us have perfect marriages. Each can be encouraged, and each can be strengthened. So I encourage each and every one of you, if you can, to make the time to join in with us beginning July 9th. And we'll be broadcasting further announcements in the upcoming weeks leading up to that. But get in now, because we're probably going to limit it to maybe 10 couples or so. Not sure yet, but so get in early so that your spot is reserved. Now let's look at biblical divorce, okay? I always have a lot of questions about divorce, especially from Messianics, Christians that want to feel that they want to separate. See, if they would have went to Weekend to Remember and they would have did the Art of Marriage small group study, they wouldn't be thinking about getting divorced, because let's face it, men and women, we're different. We have different goals. The man wants to be respected and the wife wants to be loved. I mean, love and respect is the key and the foundation, as we talked about last week, of biblical marriage, just as Messiah loves us and respects us. And he loves us and we respect him, right? And we don't go off and do our own thing. We're not out whoring around and going behind his back and having affairs and committing all kinds of lewd acts if we are believers of Messiah. But yet those things actually do happen in the congregation of believers. As I said last week, I've counseled many people who deal with pornography issues and drug issues, alcoholism. There's the issues that we find in the world are very prevalent in the congregation of believers, because why? The enemy is always there. The enemy lures and tempts us into sin, and then it is us who act on that sin, and then we commit that. And then Satan has a legal right to us. And we're going to do another series, and that's in the months ahead, on spiritual warfare, because that's not being taught anywhere in the congregations that I know of. We're involved with a ministry that deals specifically and primarily with spiritual warfare. And so we're going to get deep into that and in the coming weeks ahead. And that is the issue. And we need to strengthen our marriages and combat that and put a hedge about us so that the enemy cannot enter in and lure us away with all the worldly nonsense that's out there right now, right? Because we see it every day on our phones, on our TV, on our ads, sex, having affairs, doing what's right in your own eyes, even homosexuality, lesbianism. It's prevalent and it's rampant everywhere. And we need to protect ourselves. We need to really put the armor on each and every minute of the day and never take it off, because he can influence us in our dreams and other areas that we don't even are aware of. And he'll hit you up beside the head, and the next thing you know, you're off on a different path than what God has called you to be on. So we have to be very, very aware so that we as children of God do not fall into the snares of the devil. Because what did Peter say? He roars around like a lion trying to devour anyone who's weak. And if you're weak spiritually, if you don't have a relationship with Yeshua, the Messiah, if you're not opening up your Bible every day and reading some passages and meditating on them, if you're not praying every day when you get up and when you go to bed, if you're not plugged into the creator of heaven and earth, then you are weakening your spiritual fortress, and the enemy is going to come in. And let me tell you, the enemy is strong. He's a strong man, and he wants to come in and he'll devour you. You think you're strong. You think at any time, you can combat that and say a couple words. The devil can get a legal contract on you, take it to the Father, and the Father has no other choice but to give you over to Satan until you repent, until you call on the name of Yeshua and redeem, and then he will fight for you. But he'll allow you to be devoured. He'll allow you to get beat up. Just ask Job. Go through the book of Job. Job, you think he was righteous, but he was self-righteous, right? And he had issues with his kids and everything. And the Lord allows Satan to chew him up. And then at the end, he redeemed him, but he lost everything. He lost a lot. So, brethren, I'm telling you now, stay connected with Messiah now. Stay strong now, so you don't have to lose everything. So you don't have to go through trials and tribulations. So you don't have to be devoured by the lion and escape from his teeth barely. And some people don't escape. Some people go back into the world and they think there's no redemption for them, and they're worse off. What did Yeshua said? The worst end is, then it's worse for them in the end than it was at the beginning. And it'd be better if they never knew Messiah than to know him and to fall away from him. So don't get into that that mentality of once saved, always saved, but get into the mentality of reading the word every day, praying to the Father and the Son, reading your word each and every day and making your spiritual fortress strong. So let's take a look at biblical divorce. Let's look at some of the scriptures on divorce. Now, divorce is a complex and sensitive topic in the Bible with various passages addressing its circumstances and implications. Now, here are some key scriptures. If you have your Bible, or take some notes, but let's look at it. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 and 4. In fact, I want to turn there now. Let me get my Bible out, actually, and go to Deuteronomy chapter 24. Just bear with me here a second so I get to it. And verses 1 through 4, what does it say? It says, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanliness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. When she has departed from his house and goes and become another man's wife, if the later husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies, who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled. For that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. Now, that's a lot to unpack there, right? And this law in Moses, the Mosaic law, provided for divorce, but it included specific conditions and processes. You just couldn't divorce her out of because you had unreconcilable differences. And now Yeshua addresses divorce in the Sermon on the Mount. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 5. So if we go to Matthew chapter 5, and see, we like to go in the Old Covenant and in the New Covenant because they complement one another. Whatever is written in the New Covenant, you're going to find it in the Old Covenant. There's nothing new, right? The Old Covenant is the new concealed, and the New Covenant is the Old Covenant revealed. So Yeshua is revealing what the intentions were of the Old Covenant that sometimes we have a hard time understanding. So he's teaching us, what does this really mean and how does it apply in our lives today? So in Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 and 32, it says, furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, so Yeshua says, this is what the original intent was of that command, that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality, right? That's the uncleanliness, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Now, that's a strong statement. So is Yeshua saying that if your wife committed adultery and you divorce her and then she remarries, you are basically forcing her to commit adultery because of being divorced, and the husband hasn't died? The only way you can separate a legal marriage really was through death of one of the other partners. So here Yeshua highlights the gravity of divorce and restricts it to the grounds to sexual immorality. So that's a deep, deep discussion there. And we'll try to unpack it a little bit, but it's very, very hard today in today's society. There's so many Christians, Messianics, believers who have divorced and then remarried. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I've done that, but the person that I remarried was not married before. So what Yeshua is trying to say here is that if you do divorce, if a man, let's talk to men, if a man divorces his wife, the next woman, if he does marry again, should really be a virgin wife. And that's basically what Yeshua is saying here. So I know that's hard for some to accept, but that is the reality of what he's saying here. Now, if we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 10 to 16, and we have time, so let's go there, the 1 Corinthians, okay, because we're not in too much of a hurry today. So let's go to 1 Corinthians 7 in verses 10 through 16. It talks about keeping your marriage vows, and Paul is providing guidance on marriage and divorce. He says in verse 10, "Now to the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord. A wife is not to depart from her husband." So I think I don't know if I shared it last week or I shared it on the threshing floor on Sunday. If you haven't watched last Sunday's threshing floor on the Lamb Network, I was interviewed by Rabbi Daryl Weinberg, and we discussed our ministry and my background. You might want to plug into that. Just look for threshing floor on the lambnetwork.tv or on YouTube. I think it's a Light to the Nations channel. But anyhow, I explained to Rabbi Daryl that, my first separation, I did not file for divorce, but my ex-wife did. She filed. She fell in love with it's funny, my best friend in church, right, in the congregation, and filed divorce. And I tried to reconcile. There was no reconciliation. They were already entangled with one another. And as soon as the divorce was finalized, they got married. So I was, that's how it happened with me. So I did not, even though we were in the congregation, the scriptures were not followed, the commands of God, that she could not divorce, but she did anyhow because she approached it from a secular viewpoint and not a biblical covenant one. So anyhow, in verse 10, he's saying, "Now to the married I command you, yet I, not the Lord. A wife is not to depart from her husband. But even if she does depart," right, divorce, depart, "let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And a husband is not to divorce his wife." So here Paul is admonishing us, not as men, not to divorce our wives. But to the rest, he says in verse 12, "I, not the Lord, say, if any brother has a wife who does not believe," okay, if you have an unbelieving wife and she is willing to live with you in peace, let him not divorce her. And I know many situations of where the man or the woman has an unbelieving spouse and they live together the best they can in harmony. In a woman who, in verse 13, he says, "In a woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he is willing to live with her, let her not divorce him." So there he says, let her not divorce him. Even though from a biblical standpoint, she is not allowed to, Paul mentions not to divorce him. Maybe in that time, there was secular divorce, or she would just depart and then force him to give her a divorce. And then in verse 14, "For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but now they are holy." So a lot of people, most, try to stay together if if one's not a believer and the other one is, they stay together for the sake of the children and to sanctify the family and to be able to live in peace as best that they can. But then in verse 15, what does Paul say? He says, "But if the unbeliever departs, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace." So there are circumstances where there may be abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and the husband and wife are just not getting together and they have to separate. They have to leave, they have to divorce because otherwise the abuse will continue and no good is going to come out of it. So you can't live in an unpeaceful environment like that. So there must be peace. And so when you separate, there is that peace. But in verse 16, Paul says, and he encourages the wives and the husbands, he says, "For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband?" So your example, wives, even though your husband may be an unbeliever, and I know many cases where the wife was called first, became a believer, went to shul, done to the congregation every Shabbat, and through her example and the fruit she exhibited through the Holy Spirit, the husband came later. And that's happened. I've seen it happen many times. And likewise with husbands and their wives, that if you are a husband and you are a believer, who knows? He says, "How do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife?" So I know people right now that have unbelieving wives. I fellowship with these people, with these men, right? I counsel with them. Their wives are unbelievers, but they're coming along through their example and through the love of the husband and taking care of the wife and the children and the household and being a light and a blessing will have a great impact on the wife loving her husband and wanting what he has. And sooner or later, they will come into becoming a believer of Messiah. So if you have a circumstance like that and you want to share that with me, if you need prayer, if you need help in that area, husbands or wives, email us. Everything is confidential. If you need counseling, I'm more than happy to get on a phone call with you and counsel, no matter where you are, and to be able to help you. That's why we're here. We're here to help and to be a blessing and to counsel and help and to call disciples of the Messiah. So we're here, and if you need help, don't be shy. Go ahead and reach out because we will do whatever we can to help you. And one way that we can help you the most is if you plug in to our upcoming Art of Marriage small group study. You will learn a lot from that. So I encourage each of you, husbands and wives, to plug into that, and you will learn a lot. So as it says here in the slide, Paul recognizes divorce in cases where an unbelieving spouse leaves, but he encourages reconciliation whenever possible. And that should be our heart. You know, as Messiah forgives us, we need to forgive our spouse, right? If we have been unfaithful or if we've committed a sin and Yeshua, the Messiah, forgives us, if we repent, right? We have to repent and call upon his name. And there may be, there's going to be consequences for the sin, but he will forgive you. What right do we as human beings who have been forgiven by Messiah for our own sins and been redeemed by his blood, what right do we have to withhold forgiveness from our spouses? Right? Remember Peter said, "How many times should I forgive my brother?" And he says 7 times only. And Yeshua says, no, 70 times 7. That circumstance can only come into play in a husband-wife relationship. But if you are in a situation where one or the other has been unfaithful, then you need counseling and you need to break those ties. You need to be delivered from those entanglements and the tethering that sometimes happens. And you need to reconcile and forgive. And then as time goes on, you will trust and you will probably, in most cases, rebuild the marriage better than ever before through open communication, through understanding, through love and respect. So I encourage each and every one of you. This is why I put on this series, because I know this is an issue that's not being addressed to so many people. They hide it. They go to the congregation, they smile, right? Everything's fine, our family's fine. And then they go home and they're fighting, and there's abuse, there's alcoholism, there's pornography going on. And then they come to the congregation, they smile some more, everything's fine. It's not fine. And if you're in sin, if you're having issues, then you need to get a hold of your life. You need to repent. You need to call upon the Father and the Son, and you need to get some help. And we're here to help if you need and if you want that help. Now, there's some rabbinic commentary on biblical divorce that we should look over, right? And the literature, rabbinic literature, offers deeper insights into the biblical understandings of divorce. Now, key resources include in the Talmud, in the Gittin, chapter 90, section 90, verse A. This tractate discusses the laws and procedures of divorce, emphasizing the importance of what's called the get. That's the divorce document. That's canceling the divorce. They call it a get. And it explores various grounds for divorce and the rights of both spouses. Now, this comes from Hillel and Shammai, these schools, right? These Talmudic schools that started back during, even before the days of Yeshua. They had differing views on divorce. Now, Shammai's school held a stricter stance, permitting divorce only in cases of sexual immorality, just like the Torah states and just like Yeshua stated. But Hillel's school, which many people follow a lot of the doctrine of Hillel, and their not recommendations, but their, I guess, doctrine's the best way to describe it. But it allowed for a broader ground such as incompatibility or dissatisfaction, because there are some circumstances in the Torah where it says even if the husband is displeased with his wife, he can give her a get, right? If he marries her and he's displeased with her for any reason, he can give her a get. But that is not the intention of the original design and what Yeshua brought out in the new covenant. He said, no, only by sexual immorality, and only, as Paul states, if you cannot reconcile to one another. So this debate reflects the diverse interpretations, and we can go through a little bit of that, the grounds for divorce and the sanctity of marriage in our discussion. Number one, the biblical grounds for divorce. So these schools and the rabbinic commentary state that for sexual immorality, both Yeshua and the school of Shammai emphasized sexual immorality as a valid ground for divorce. This underscores the importance of sexual fidelity in marriage. Now, in other grounds, the school of Hillel and Paul's writing recognized additional grounds such as abandonment and severe incompatibility. These interpretations highlight the need for practical considerations. And then relating to the sanctity of marriage, we have to understand, my friends, that this is a divine covenant. Marriage is viewed as a divine covenant, and divorce is seen as the last resort. The Bible emphasizes the importance of commitment and reconciliation, and the impact of community and family. Divorce affects not only the couple, right, but also their families and communities. It goes far and wide. Remember what Paul said, a little leaven, a little sin, and this is a lot of sin, leavens the whole lump, meaning the whole community of believers and their families and extended families and the children. How many people are products of broken families? How many believers have had mother or father that have divorced and they have paid the price for that separation? And it has had a direct impact on them. And then it leads into generational curses. It leads into the sons thinking, oh, I'm never going to divorce. I thought, my dad divorced his wife, married my mom, had me out of wedlock. I was a bastard child. Okay. So I don't mind sharing personal things with you. I was born out of wedlock, but then my dad married my mom and they lived together till death do them part. I buried both of them together. But that had a great impact on his wife's, ex-wife's family and all the half brothers that I have and sisters. And it had an effect on me going to school. I was ridiculed. I was made, sometimes made fun of. I never got in fights about it, but I always had to keep things quiet. Even my grandparents, my grandfather disowned my mom. She was the black sheep of the family. And, they never really had reconciliation until towards the end when he passed. And I ended up burying my grandfather also. Can you believe that? I buried my grandfather, my mom, or my dad, and my mom. My grandmother passed away years before, but my grandmother and grandfather had the most influence on me growing up. And God, I'm so thankful to God that they were involved in my life, because they were ones that married over 50 years and till death do them part. And they were one unit. I mean, they did everything together. They bowled together, they golfed together, they played cards, they did everything together. They were a great example for me. But not everyone has that example, right? So I had to break generational curses, right? If you are a product of a divorced family, then you have generational curses that you need to break also. And that's why we're going to get into spiritual warfare in some of the upcoming episodes at the Hebraic Living broadcast, because we need to break free of that, because we don't want to keep repeat our mistakes. So divorce not only affects the couple, but their families and communities. The Bible and rabbinic literature stress the need to approach divorce with care and consideration for its broader impact. And then point number 3, the process of divorce. The divorce document. In Jewish tradition, the get is essential for a valid divorce. It must be willingly given by the husband and accepted by the wife, ensuring that the divorce is consensual and properly documented. So if you've divorced your wife secularly and you never gave her a get, and you were a believer and you were married, like maybe you signed a ketubah or you're under the huppah, and you didn't give your wife a get, then technically, from a God's viewpoint, you're not really officially divorced in his eyes. But from a legal standpoint, if you have gone through the divorce process, then you are. And then there's the legal and ethical considerations. Both biblical and rabbinic sources highlight the need for fairness and justice in the divorce process, protecting the rights and well-being of both spouses. Now, let's review. So the biblical teachings on divorce emphasize the sanctity of marriage and the seriousness of ending a marital union, while acknowledging grounds for divorce. The Bible and rabbinic literature stress reconciliation and careful consideration of the broader impact. Understanding these principles provides valuable insights for navigating the complexities of marital relationships. Now, next we are going to explore the secular views on divorce and comparing and contrasting them with the biblical perspectives. We're going to get into that next week. I think we'll end up having a 4-part series here, or 4 sections, and this is part 4 of section 2, I guess we would call it, or section B. But that gives you a good lead-in to biblical divorce and the thoughts on it from the scriptures. I encourage each of you to go back and read 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and 8, okay? Because he talks about the principles of marriage in chapter 7, and then in chapter 8 he's talking about idols. But the whole chapter 7 deals with the principles of marriage in keeping your marriage vows and then living as you are called. Okay. And then he actually talks to the unmarried and the widows. Now, we have a couple minutes here. So let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, because Paul talks to the unmarried and the widows. And if you're married here and you want to share this to a younger couple, a younger teenager, get them involved with this now and not later. Because he says in verse 7, verse 25, he says, and he goes, now concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. I suppose, therefore, that this is good because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loose from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned. Why the Catholics don't understand this, I don't know. Why they force their priests not to marry. They get into so much trouble because the desires burn within them, right? So he's saying, but even if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. So what he's saying there, that if you have a ministry, or if you are traveling and you're doing ministerial works and you are not married, then you should continue as you are and continue doing that. But if you feel the desire to marry, then marry. But remember that when you marry, your obligation is to your wife or husband, and then later to your children, to your family. So you may have to do it as a family ministry. But remember, men, do not just leave your wife and family alone and continue to work 80 hours a week doing ministry work and just leave your wife and don't tend to her needs. Remember, even in Israel, when a husband and wife married, they took 1 year off to be together and to build that family relationship. And that's what I encourage each and every one of new believers to do. Don't get so involved in ministry works to the point to where you are separated from your spouse, but live together in harmony, learn and study each other, understand one another, pray together. The greatest thing you can do, men and women, to save your marriage is to pray together. I come across so many couples. I ask them, do you pray together? No, not really. Why? Why don't you pray together to the Lord? hold hands, open up the word, and pray together. Pray for one another. It's not that hard to do. The words will come out. Uplift and encourage one another. Do you know what true love is, my friends? The outgoing concern for the other person and not yourself. When you stop thinking about yourself and your needs and your wants and your desires and your lusts, and that's all you're praying about, and that's what you're expecting your spouse to deliver, you're still immature. You're still an immature believer if that's your mindset. But when you start putting yourself last and you start sacrificing your desires for your spouse's desires and your family's desires, and you start praying for others and you start serving others, then the Lord will answer your prayers. Remember what Solomon did? He says, God asked Solomon, what do you want? You want long life? You want the defeat of your enemies? You want, riches? What do you want? Tell me anything. I'll give it to you. And what did Solomon ask for? Wisdom. So men, ask for wisdom. How to lead your family, how to submit yourself to the Messiah, and how to be a blessing and to make the world a better place. And then what did God do to Solomon? He added everything on top of what he desired, right? He got the riches, he got the good health, and the defeat of all his enemies. So I want to encourage each of you to join with us to make it a weekend to remember. Great marriages just don't happen. You have to work at it. So coming to your area in the rest of this year and into 2026, go to weekendtoremember.com, find a location close to you and sign up. Invest in your marriage. Use our group name, AMJCC, and get $100 off per couple. And if you're in the Dallas Metroplex and you want to join with us, we will be there in November. So I encourage each of you to join up. And then if you want to join in part of our Art of the Marriage small group study, please join us. And there is the contact information. Email us at info@mymdi.org. So next week, my friends, we're going to get into secular divorce. Until then, God bless. And it was a pleasure being with you today. We'll see you again next week. If you missed today's show or want to watch it again or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lambnetwork.tv, where you will find this show and all the other live Lamb Show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network. We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the lambnetwork.tv website. I'm Jeffrey Clark. Thank you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.